Hey there! Welcome to the channel where we break down the biggest mysteries in the world of money and the state. Today, we'll answer one of the most fascinating questions. How does the United States, the richest country on Earth, really make money? Where does all the cash in the federal budget come from? How does the US finance its army, NASA, Social Security, and global influence? And why is the dollar still the world's #1 currency? If you're curious about how America really works, hit subscribe, smash that like button, and let me know in the comments. What surprises you the most about the US economy? Let's get started! 1. What does it mean for a country to make money? For a company, it's simple. Sell products or services, collect revenue, pay expenses, and keep the profit. But for a country, especially the US, it's more complex. The US government doesn't sell goods like a business. Instead, its main income comes from taxes, contributions, fees, and investments, all collected from citizens, companies, and trade partners. These funds are then redistributed, paying for pensions, healthcare, schools, infrastructure, military, research, and much more. So when we ask, how does the USA make money? We really mean, where do federal revenues come from? And how does the state manage such vast finances? 2A. The size of the U.S. federal budget. Unimaginable numbers. Every year, the U.S. government prepares a federal budget, the master plan for all expected income and expenses. For 2024, federal revenues are projected to reach about $4.9 trillion USD. That's $900 billion. Federal spending, however, is set at more than $6.4 trillion, so the U.S. will run a deficit of over $1.5 trillion. For perspective, the entire Czech economy produces about $250 billion a year, so the U.S. budget is nearly 20 times larger. And that's just the federal level. States like California or Texas run their own budgets, with local governments and agencies adding even more. 3. Where does America's money actually come from? Main sources of federal revenue: income taxes, individual income tax, the biggest chunk by far, over $2.4 trillion USD in 2024. Almost every working American pays federal income tax, which ranges from 10% to 37% depending on income level. On top of that, most states levy their own income taxes. For example, California's top rate is 13%. Corporate income tax. U.S. businesses pay a flat federal corporate tax rate of 21%. In 2024, this will add about $420 billion USD to the federal coffers. Payroll taxes and social insurance. Social Security, retirement disability. Collected through a payroll tax, 6.2% from both employee and employer, generating more than $1.5 trillion USD per year. Medicare, healthcare for seniors. A separate payroll tax, 1.45% from employee and employer, with annual revenues over $400 billion. Indirect taxes and other federal revenues: excise taxes, levied on goods like gasoline, tobacco, alcohol, and firearms. For example, federal gasoline tax is 18.4 cents per gallon. Total annual excise tax revenue, about $85 billion USD. Customs duties, tariffs on imported goods, cars, electronics, clothing, bring in about $85 billion USD each year. Other fees, fines, and charges, patent fees, park entry, immigration fees, fines, and more add a few billion to the pot. Returns from federal assets. The government owns vast forests, oil and gas leases, and real estate. Revenue from these assets, like land leases, timber sales, and energy royalties, adds up to several billion dollars per year. The true engines of the American economy: technology and big business. The USA is home to Apple, Microsoft, Google, Alphabet, Amazon, Meta, Facebook, and more, some of the world's most valuable companies. These big tech giants alone have a combined market value of over $10 trillion USD and contribute massive tax revenues, innovation, and exports. Apple's annual revenue is over $380 billion USD, and the entire Silicon Valley ecosystem drives U.S. economic power. Industry, manufacturing, and defense. Automotive. Ford, GM, Tesla, and countless suppliers. Aerospace and defense. Boeing, Lockheed Martin, Northrop Grumman, Raytheon, leading in civilian and military aviation, space, and defense exports. Pharmaceuticals and biotech. Pfizer, Johnson & Johnson, Moderna, leaders in research, development, and global drug supply. Finance, Wall Street, and global banking. New York City is the global capital of finance. Major banks, J.P. Morgan Chase, Bank of America, Goldman Sachs, investment funds, BlackRock, and the NYSE, the world's largest stock exchange. Wall Street generates billions in corporate tax and powers global investment flows. Healthcare, education, science. America spends over 20% of its GDP on healthcare, about $4.5 trillion annually. Top universities, Harvard, MIT, Stanford, and research centers attract students, scientists, and funding from all over the world. Agriculture, energy, and natural resources. Farming. The U.S. is the world's top producer-exporter of corn, soybeans, cotton, and wheat. Energy. Since 2018, the U.S. has become a net energy exporter, leading in oil and gas production, ExxonMobil, Chevron, and renewables. Export power and global trade. U.S. exports are worth about $2.1 trillion annually. Key exports: machinery, vehicles, aircraft, electronics, chemicals, software, and financial services. Main trading partners: Canada, Mexico, China, Japan, Germany, the UK, South Korea. Trade deficit. The U.S. imports more than it exports, running a trade deficit often over $800 billion per year, largely due to consumer goods from China, the EU, and others. However, American companies like Apple, Microsoft, and Google book most of their profits in the U.S., boosting tax income. The power of the dollar. America's hidden advantage: the U.S. dollar is the world's main reserve currency. Over 60% of global foreign currency reserves are held in dollars, and most international trade, especially oil, is conducted in USD. This gives the U.S. enormous advantages. The U.S. can issue treasury bonds, government debt, at low interest rates. Other countries and central banks are eager to buy them. The U.S. can run large deficits and finance global activities without the risk of currency collapse. Exporting inflation. If the U.S. prints more dollars, the effects are spread worldwide, not just at home. That's why the U.S. has been able to sustain large deficits for decades without losing investor confidence. State enterprises, agencies, and federal investments. Unlike many European countries, the U.S. has few classical state-owned companies, but federal government still owns U.S. Postal Service, USPS, Amtrak, National Rail, NASA, military research agencies. The U.S. also invests massively in infrastructure, science, and technology, spending over $700 billion per year on defense and tens of billions on NASA, highways, and green energy. How the U.S. earns from debt, the Fed, and global finance, the Federal Reserve, Fed. America's central bank can print dollars, set interest rates, and influence the global economy. Treasury bonds. The U.S. sells government bonds to investors around the world. China, Japan, and other countries together hold over $7 trillion in U.S. debt. Inflation. When prices rise, the government collects more tax, but so do debt and spending. What does the U.S. government spend its money on? Social programs, Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, over $2.9 trillion per year. Defense military, more than $700 billion annually, by far the largest defense budget in the world. Interest on debt, over $660 billion per year goes to paying interest on federal debt. Education, science, infrastructure, hundreds of billions invested yearly. Challenges and criticism. The limits of the American model. Massive national debt. At the end of 2023, U.S. federal debt reached almost $34 trillion, over 125% of GDP. Inequality and regional divides. Huge gaps between rich and poor, as well as between different states. Complicated tax system. Hundreds of loopholes, deductions, and differences between federal and state taxes. Trade deficit. The U.S. buys more from the world than it sells, but dominates in finance, technology, and culture. The future. What will the U.S. make money on? AI, digital services, biotech. Silicon Valley leads the world in AI and the next big thing. Energy and green transformation. Investments in renewables, electric vehicles, and domestic energy independence. Science, space, defense. Billions for advanced research, space programs, NASA, SpaceX, and military innovation. Education, culture, entertainment, universities, Hollywood, Netflix, sports. Soft power and global influence. America's main sources of income are individual and corporate taxes, Social Security, global exports of services and high-tech goods, and the unique power of the dollar. The U.S. leads in military, innovation, and financial markets. attracting capital and talent from across the globe. Yet it faces challenges: huge national debt, inequality, global competition, especially from China and the EU. Let me know in the comments. What shocks or fascinates you most about the American economy? Do you think the dollar will remain the world's #1 currency? What should America focus on to keep making money in the future? How long do you think the US will stay at the top of the global economy? Don't forget to like, subscribe, and check out the next video, where we'll break down how China makes money and why its model challenges the entire world system.